celebrating 35 years of legendary music and revolutionary shows by the one and only Pearl Jam with author Selena Fragassi next on Booked on Rock.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Selena Fragassi is back on the podcast. This is her second appearance. Last time was for her excellent book on Alanis Morissette. Today, she is here to talk about her brand new book, Pearl Jam Live, 35 Years of Legendary Music and Revolutionary Shows. Welcome back, Selena. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Much talked about and written about Pearl Jam studio work, but it's great to see a book paying tribute to this band's history as a live band. It does get into the studio work as well in this book, but it's just great because this is one of the greatest live bands of all time.
Agreed.
Talk about what fans will get inside this book and what were the resources you had to put it together, because this is a complete overview.
Yeah, it's, I was trying to think of a new way to talk about Pearl Jam because, like you said, there's been so many books and the great PJ-20 documentary and so many different ways you can kind of approach Pearl Jam. But to me, their legacy is really a live band and the community that they formed around that live experience. I think they're kind of like the Grateful Dead of this era where people caravan and meet new friends, and they're just a very special place to build community. In terms of resources, there have been so many great resources. I have to really shout out the fact that fans have been incredible archivers of this band. So everyone from the Pearl Jam Concert Chronicles to Live on Four Legs to Pearl Jam's own website has so much copious info about each individual tour date. There's more than 1,100. I actually typed out each one for this book because I wanted them all in there, but also personally, I wanted to understand the magnitude of how voluminous their live career has been.
Take us back to October 22nd, 1990. This is the very first show by Pearl Jam. They weren't called Pearl Jam yet. They're called Mookie Blaylock. This is an infamous hole-in-the-wall club in Seattle called the Off-Ramp Cafe. Tell us about this show, because this is not long after Mother Love Bone had suddenly ended.
Yeah, just a few months prior in March 1990, Andy Wood sadly passed away. Stone and Jeff were left to kind of consider their future for a time they didn't really want to pursue music in a very an official capacity until they met Eddie Vedder. And really, it was a demo tape that got into the hands of Eddie Vedder. That Stone's instrumentals were on it. Eddie created music and lyrics. He wrote his own version of really the Who's Tommy, his own rock opera. It was crazy, for lack of a better word, but it really struck a chord and had an impact on this band. And so the craziest thing is that Eddie Vedder came to Seattle permanently October 8th. 14 days later, they had their first show and a lot of material written, which just seems impossible to me to have material and chemistry and be ready to have a show. And the amount of pressure on everyone, particularly Eddie Vedder, at this very first date, knowing the Seattle community was there to see kind of like, who's this guy taking the place of Andy Wood? It was, to quote Chris Cornell, one of the best debuts he's ever seen. And in that room that night, Pearl Jam was made.
Yeah, he came from San Diego.
He sure did.
Yeah, the Mother Love Bone photographer was talking about people weren't welcoming. Yeah, they weren't welcoming Eddie Vedder with open arms. They did not want to accept him, but he won people over pretty quickly.
I would say so. Yeah, I think like he had a lot to prove that. And I think he made a lot of non-believers sort of give him a chance. Lance is very vocal about the fact that he wanted to walk out when he saw this new guy on stage. And I think you have to understand the magnanimous of Andy Wood. People loved him. He was a showman. He was the heart and soul of the Seattle scene. And when he passed, my God, you cannot replace the man. And Stone and Jeff really didn't want to. That's why they began a new project and took someone really outside of Seattle to make this project gel. And so there were a lot of people who had their doubts, who wanted to see Eddie prove himself. But I think he sure did that first night. Yeah,
there was a pretty pivotal moment when Eddie Vedder finds his onstage power, or his magic, or his influence over the audience. You call it in the book, The Night Eddie Came Alive, January 10th, 1991. Tell us about this one in Canada, Victoria, BC, Canada.
Yeah, so Pearl Jam had only had several shows under their belt at this point. It was only a few months after their first show, and they were opening for Alice in Chains, whose Facelift EP was out. So they were the support act. They only played a few songs, but Eddie was noticing the crowd was really rowdy and not paying attention, and I think he was motivated to get them to pay attention, and so he did the unthinkable and just started his very crazy Tarzan theatrics.
Yeah, they were more interested in getting drunk.
Yes.
You say the book than watching a show, but yeah, he turned them around. Before I get to the next question, I just want to set it up with some great pieces of history from the book here. The band signed with Epic on February 22nd of 1991, and soon after changed the name to Pearl Jam. They played their final show as Mookie Blaylock on March 2nd, 1991 at Seattle's OK Hotel. By March 10th, they appeared on the Seattle rock station KISW to announce the new name. And by May 17th, once again at the off-ramp, they officially performed as Pearl Jam. They recorded the now classic album 10 and hit the road in July of 91 ahead of its late August release. And there's a show on July 21st at First Ave in Minneapolis, I believe, where you say it was, quote, "The birth as we know it of Pearl Jam, the venerable tour gods who have gone on to transfix crowds, sell out shows, and become the leaders of a masterclass in how to perform live." An employee shared the story of that night from the book. Eddie was playing to a real small crowd, but he's performing as if his life depends on it, right?
Oh yeah. That was Eddie. I think it didn't matter what scenario you put him into, whether it was huge billowing crowds at Lollapalooza or these really tiny shows. Even when he was a support act for Alice in Chains, or they were a support act for Alice in Chains, they wanted to give it their all. And I think really a game changer was when Nirvana's Nevermind came out, and Pearl Jam had some dates with Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they saw this band blow up and how great they were on stage. And rather than take it as we want to be better than them, they're like, we got to elevate ourselves to be at this level. So they were always thinking about how do we make the best show we can and make an impression on these fans. And they just, to this day, they give their all in every single show they put forth.
They sure do.
Yeah.
You discussed the quote unquote dizzying drummer situation, 5 drummers in 35 years, but they all had an important role to fill. Like Dave Pruess in the beginning, I loved his style. Dave Abruzzese, another outstanding drummer. And just recently, another drummer changed, right? Matt Cameron is no longer in the band. So who are the other guys? Those are 3 I mentioned.
Jack Irons. And Dave, Jack, and who am I blanking on right now? Oh my gosh.
There's a 5th.
Yes, I'm blanking.
Well,
yes.
While you think of it, do you have a personal favorite? Because I loved Dave Crewson. In fact, he was in a band with the guys from Blind Melon, Unified Theory, which I was happy to see. But do you have a favorite? Because they're different styles.
They're all very different styles, and I appreciate all of them in their own way. Sorry, Matt Chamberlain. There we go.
That's right.
Yeah, there's another double name. There's the Daves, the Matts. There we go. Matt Chamberlain.
I knew if I gave you enough time, you'd get it.
He was very, very short-lived for a very, very short period of time, but not that he wasn't insignificant. But Matt Cameron, I have to say Matt Cameron. I think Matt Cameron took on a heroic feat of literally playing in 2 huge bands at the same time for a spell, learning all these Pearl Jam songs and getting right into the mix of their crazy changing set lists every night. And I just feel like there's a reason why he was in the band as their drummer the longest. I think he was really a guiding force and a calming force for the band. And I'm so sad he left. He made the announcement after this book went to production, so it's not in the book, but I kind of like that it's not, because this book really celebrates all the contributions Matt made to Pearl Jam.
There seemed to be nothing personal with his situation, and I think there's only really one situation. I think it was Abruzzese, who maybe they just felt like he was starting to live that rock and roll lifestyle a little too much.
Yeah, and the rumor is like that Dave really was axed after the whole Ticketmaster fracas, because Dave did not understand why they were doing that, why they were backpedaling and not doing videos or singles. And so I think like his personal ethos was like, let's shoot for the stars and keep this rolling. Whereas other band members wanted to backpedal a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know. I've just read a book on Coachella, and I didn't realize Pearl Jam plays a pretty big role in that. In the early days, there was a venue they didn't want to play. Can't remember the specifics, but it had to do with Pearl Jam not wanting to play at a venue that was run by Ticketmaster.
Yeah, Pearl Jam was, I don't believe Pearl Jam played Coachella, but they did, of course, play all of 92 for Lollapalooza, the second year of the festival. And that's really what changed the game for Pearl Jam, was being on that lineup and all the younger fans that came out. It was an anomaly, that festival. But yeah, Pearl Jam was very staunch in how they felt about Ticketmaster and not kowtowing to working with them until it kind of became, they realized you kind of had to, sadly, because of the, lack of a better word, monopoly in place. But yeah.
That became a big story. MTV covered it. Remember it well. They toured the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which gave Pearl Jam heavy exposure, driving radio to pay attention more and more to them. And then we have Nirvana's Nevermind hitting #1. By January of 92, Pearl Jam was part of a sea change. And they were, as you read, ready to ride that wave and also start to use it for a greater purpose. Expand on that, how Pearl Jam used that popularity to influence changes in causes that they cared about, and they still do.
Yeah, Pearl Jam is a very amazing group of very passionate people who believe in a lot of very important causes, whether it's women's rights, voting rights, homelessness, the environment. And they have stood behind that. They have the Vitalogy Foundation, which to date has raised millions of dollars to give to these causes through their ticket sales. And in the beginning, as they were growing up and not even a household name yet, they really put their voices, they used their platform to elevate those causes. And so they played shows like Rock for Choice and Rock the Vote. They did the Drop in the Park show for voting to get people registered to vote. They played a show for the Apache Nation in Arizona to try to save their land. And they, even in 2017, I believe it was, they had the home shows in Seattle where they raised a ton of money for the homeless community. They've just been, for me, my whole theory and thesis behind this book is that Pearl Jam is a band for the people. And I think they've shown that over a long period of time. But it really started with taking those causes on for their fans and the greater community of humans.
In one part of the book, you write about how there was a show Pearl Jam played on New Year's Eve of 1991 at the Cow Palace in Daly City, California. And you write, quote, a reporter with Rolling Stone was in the crowd that night and said the show even eclipsed that of hometown heroes Grateful Dead, who are playing their long-running annual NYE Bash down the road. Now, that's interesting to me. I'm a big Dead fan, and I always looked at Pearl Jam as very similar because they built a fan base much in the way the Grateful Dead did, changing up the set list, allowing for fans to record shows. And you mentioned, Eddie, thanking the Dead. This is when they used the stage at Soldier Field in July of 95. Right. Have any of the guys in the band talked at length about Grateful Dead? Are they fans of the band?
I did not find that in my research, that any were like super big fans of them. I think there was a respect for them, and I think they very much modeled a lot of what they did after the community that Grateful Dead had built. And I think the fans also played into that because, like I said, they've caravan to all these different shows. There's an international presence. They've made their own community of friends as well through being together at these shows. So that communal aspect is very much taking off from Grateful Dead.
Yeah, because their shows, their audiences got bigger and bigger at a point when radio was not playing as much of their singles, when they were taking a little more risks with the music and they weren't as mainstream. And yet here they were, the audiences got bigger and bigger. They're playing Madison Square Garden like 2 nights, 3 nights. It's just cool. I love it. Eddie Vedder's risk taking on stage, those were becoming a concern for his bandmates, the roadies, and the venues. For insurance reasons. There were some moments where people were worried he'd fall to his death, especially in the early days. There were like put up and tear down fast stage sets, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's crazy. Like you look at something like the most notorious, maybe it was that Pink Pop in the Netherlands, when he's like on those rafters and he's on the crane for the camera. It's like, what was this man thinking? But I think it was just adrenaline at the time. But I can't imagine all the people, his bandmates being like, please don't die right now. And Lollapalooza, when they had like tear up, tear down structures in some of these parks. And it was a huge concern of how they knew he was going to do this. But hopefully, fingers crossed, he survives.
There was a theft in Sweden, a callous theft in Sweden that you talk about in the book. And this is in June of 1992. This was a shift-changing moment. What happened and how did that affect Eddie?
Yeah, his like the lyrics were stolen, his info was stolen. I think at this point it was just Eddie Vedder was too much in the forefront and he became the poster child for this band and a celebrity in so many ways, and he had stalkers. And I think it was, when he started saying enough is enough and was backpedaling. He didn't want to do any of these things that would raise his exposure or have these labels put on him that he wasn't asking for, of this voice of a generation, all the pressure that came with it. And so that's when you saw Eddie kind of backpedal, and he was riding in his own vans and doing the radio tour when he was on en route with Pearl Jam. He wanted to get back to the sort of punk roots that he grew up in. It was a real about face to the celebrity paparazzi nature of what happened.
That's around the time you wore a mask as well.
Yeah, no, a helmet. He had an army helmet for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wore an army helmet, and I think that was literally like maybe a tongue-in-cheek joke, but who knows? I mean, I think honestly, he was very concerned about his, things could happen. I mean, he had stalkers.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com, make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. Pearl Jam Live, 35 years of legendary music and revolutionary shows. Let's get into the Ticketmaster story a little bit more. This was brewing for a few years, dating back to 92, but it was during the Vitology tour around March of 94 when it reached a head. What was their issue, and how did that all play out ultimately?
Yeah, there were things that were happening where they were trying to do like free shows, like Drop in the Park, where it was really just a platform to get people to register to vote. And it was a complimentary, ticket, a comp ticket, and Ticketmaster was adding fees onto this for a free show, and that really pissed off Pearl Jam because they didn't want there to be, these tacked on things and corporate natures. Ticketmaster was printing like AT&T and stuff on the tickets. That's very antithetical to who Pearl Jam is. And so they didn't want to do this anymore. And they weren't agreeing with the fees that Ticketmaster was tacking on that we all know of today, which can be 50% of more of your ticket price. Knowing how they were young and they remembered how it was to want to go see shows and not have a lot of money, they really were trying to stand up for their fan base because they didn't want there to be a roadblock for people to come see their live shows. This is a band who literally formed in order to play live. So it was very important to them to cultivate that community that could still come out and see them.
What was the long-term effect that had, do you think? Beneficial?
Yeah, I
Did
think
they make an impact?
sadly, no, because as you can see, Taylor Swift had to try to do the same thing 30 years later, and we're still dealing with, for lack of a better word, a monopoly. There's not a lot of options in the ticketing space for bands. Many bands have spoken out, like The Cure talks about the fees that they try to knock down. We have this whole thing now with the where they're sorry, I'm blanking on the word, but they're
Like a surcharge or
yeah, not the surcharge, but when they have like the markets where they know there's going to be a higher demand, they raise the price, they hijack it, those markets, right? So they're doing like a lot of practices that really are sketchy and that have not changed. I give Pearl Jam a lot of credit for trying to change the structure, but it was a David and Goliath fight, and I think they went to Congress to try to speak about this, but frankly, I'm shocked that they survived all of that, because for a band that was still kind of in their infancy to take on a corporation and to bucket and try to do their own planning of a tour could have been the kiss of death.
Huge risk.
Yeah.
April 8th, 1994, Pearl Jam played at the Patriot Center in Fairfax, Virginia, and that was the day that Kurt Cobain died. The press had fans wondering if Eddie and Kurt got along. Were they enemies? I don't think they ever were. There was a mutual respect there, but the media kind of played that up.
They weren't enemies, and in fact, there's some lovely footage that was seen for the first time in the Pearl Jam 20 documentary of them being at the MTV Awards where they're embracing backstage. I think things were really taken out of context, and the media created this drama. And I think if there was any kind of discord, it's the fact that Nirvana was so punk rock in their ethos, and they were like, we don't want to be mainstream. They hated any idea of that. And Pearl Jam, no fault of their own, kind of got thrown into it. And so there was that kind of ruffling of ideologies. But I think they both had the same idea. They didn't want to be the face or the voice of a generation like that was tagged on them, but they just got thrown into it. But no, I think that they were friendly.
What did he say that night at that show about Kurt?
It was heartfelt, and if I remember, it's to the effect of like we wouldn't be here without Kurt. Like he had such an impact. Pearl Jam wrestled with the idea of should they go on that night. In fact, they were at the White House because that show was in Fairfax. They were very close to the White House. Bill Clinton had them come in, and he wanted to know. There's a great photo of Bill Clinton with the band. He wanted to know, should I be going and making a national address on TV to kind of quell a lot of the feelings that this young generation kind of had about losing Kurt, and Pearl Jam dissuaded him from doing so, actually.
According to the book, Pearl Jam has covered Neil Young's Rocket in the Free World nearly 350 times. Talk about his influence on the band and why they regard him as a mentor. They lovingly refer to him as Uncle Neil.
They sure do. In fact, the lore is that their name, the Jam part of their name, comes from really seeing Neil Young at a date that they signed their contract with Epic. They went to go see Neil at a New York show, and that became part of their name. He was Uncle Neil to them, and I think Neil Young came in at very pivotal moments when Pearl Jam needed a mentor, a North Star, like they called him. And I think, if you talk about nonconformity, Neil Young had done that for years. And he was the voice of reason for them and kept them motivated to keep on the path that they were on. When Eddie Vedder was sick at that one date, I believe in San Francisco, and Neil had to kind of come in and cover for them. He like quote unquote rescued them at several points throughout the course of their career. And he also showed them the ways that you can experiment with your music while still keeping your persona intact. Yeah, he's been a real guiding force for Pearl Jam this entire time.
Very important moment in Pearl Jam live history. It takes place on September 13th of 1995. We talked about their similarity to the Grateful Dead, allowing fans to record. This is when the band announced taping of shows is permitted. How important of a moment is that in terms of the band's live legacy?
Oh my gosh, so important. Because you think about today, if you go to shows where everyone has their phones out, they want to capture the moment, they want to feel it, they want to remember how it felt being there. And Pearl Jam allowing people to do bootlegs was unheard of. I mean, you had people like Bob Dylan trying to, and other bands who were like adamantly against it. When CBS Records tried to put out the live recordings of Bob, and he was trying to go after them. So, Pearl Jam really changed the guard with allowing it at their shows, not only allowing it, but they're like, we want to give you better quality. So they ended up recording them themselves. And I think, for one, it was an olive branch to fans, but for two, it's created this incredible archive. They have like hundreds of bootlegs at this point. So you can tap back into a show you went to, one you've heard about, and feel like you were there.
Going back again now to another topic that I briefly mentioned, but as we get into the second half of the 90s, radio is not embracing them as much. The band is taking some chances. 1996's No Code confused the fans a little bit, but the band was testing their fans' loyalty. And they proved that they were going to follow the band no matter what they were going to try to do. Right.
Yeah.
That was a huge, I think that was a pivotal moment as well. That's when they realized we've got fans that are going to be with us here.
Yeah, and it came at a really interesting time because it was right after the whole Ticketmaster debacle. So they had been kind of testing fans' willingness to stick with them this entire, few year span. But yeah, Pearl Jam, it's remarkable to me that they have stayed as relevant and active for these entire 35 years because there were big dips in their career that could have really just killed the band or killed off their fan base because they would have migrated to something else. So I think it's a testament to their character. And I think by the fact that they stayed true to themselves and authentic, it made them want to continue the band as well.
Great albums too. It's just that they didn't have the songs that were radio friendly, but I'm thinking of, what's the one with Love Boat Captain?
Riot Act.
Yes, Riot Act. I think it was Riot Act. All great stuff. I mean,
binaural. Such different ways of recording. Yeah,
yep,
totally.
That's the other one. Yeah. Let's get to the fans some more. What is the 10 Club? When did it form, and what is the status of it today?
Kind of from the beginning, it took over from Mother Love Bone fan club, and it morphed into the 10 Club once they had 10 come out. And right away, they were issuing really special collectible items, whether it was an unreleased single for Christmas or it was anything that they would send fans that they could collect. And they were adding to this idea of having like these physical products in an era where we don't have those anymore. And Pearl Jam stopped the physical releases at one point, but they still deliver that club is very active today when fan clubs aren't really around anymore. I think Metallica has one, but it's not a model that truly exists in large part because, social media has taken over that community aspect in many ways. But Ticketmaster was the front lines for fans. It was where you could and still can get first access to tickets. It's where you get updates from the band that they're not sharing elsewhere. It's a real exclusive community and there's a specialness to it. And I think by them establishing that and carrying it on for 35 years, it's really edified that fan base.
Some epic shows in the 2000s, and there's one noted in the book, July 11th, 2003 in Boston. This is at the Tweeter Center, known as the 45-song Boston Marathon. It's a record breaker, right?
Yeah.
In terms of number of songs.
Yeah,
second
not
in
longest
length.
set, but longest.
Right.
Or sorry, as most songs. Yeah.
Now, the one that's the longest in length is Philadelphia, October 09. Is that 3.5 hours?
I thought it was Soldier Field, but I could be wrong on that.
Wow.
Soldier Field was a long one too.
Yeah. They essentially changed the set list pretty drastically each night. I mean, they switch out quite a few. There are songs that they'll always include, I think, but
yeah, they're always going to include some from 10, of course. That's their like benchmark album. But they change it every night. And it's not even like close to the night before with just a few different. It's like a drastically different set list. I've seen them many times on multiple nights here in Chicago or when I was at PJ20. And it's really interesting to me how they curate that. And they know like a lot of fans do end up coming for multiple nights. And so they want to make it very unique every single time.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. Easier. It's an art. Easier said than done because they have to be prepared to know every single song in the catalog. You got to know back and forth. Were you at the Wrigley Field show in 2013 when they played until 2 a.m.?
I sure was.
Oh, you were there.
I sure was. Yeah.
All right. Tell us about this. Why did it go until 2 a.m.? There was a delay.
There was a rain delay, fittingly enough, at Wrigley Fields, where they got 7 songs in, and then they had to tell people, go into the concourse. We have to evacuate, because it was an open field. We don't have a rooftop there. And so we all had to go into the concourse, but they promised they would be back. And so we were all in the concourse. I thought I was going to die that night. It was, Wrigley Field, it's an older ballpark, so there wasn't like a lot of room to move. Where I was at, they were running out of water. I was freaking out. Like, should I leave? I was having a panic attack a bit, I'll be honest. But I'm like, I'm going to stay because I know this band they're men of their words and they are going to come back. And sure enough, they did. I actually chatted with the team at Wrigley Field this year because they celebrated 20 years of concerts. And we talked a bit about how the band was able to do that because Wrigley is in a neighborhood. There's a very, very strict curfew, but they were able to get the city to waive that without having any penalties. And it was one of the most mythological shows I've ever seen there.
Do you remember how much of the audience stuck around?
A huge part of it. Yeah. I would say like 90% was still there.
The loyal Pearl Jam fans.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll finish with this. So many great Pearl Jam moments from those who saw Pearl Jam live in the book, which is really cool. Let's finish with your personal Pearl Jam moment. Maybe you just told me what it is, the Wrigley show in 2013, but is there a show that stands out for you as the best?
Yeah, it's actually not the Wrigley show as much as that was incredible. It was PJ20, the 20th anniversary weekend in Alpine Valley. And the reason behind that is because I talk a bit about this in the book, but I, as a teen growing up listening to alt rock radio, I gleaned to Pearl Jam pretty early, and I loved the first 3 albums, 10 Verses and Vitalogy. But I dropped off a bit with No Code and Thereafter because I think at that time my ear wasn't mature enough to understand.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like they had such a formula for these great rock bangers, and I just wasn't getting it. And so they kind of dropped off for me until I got this assignment to cover PJ20, and it brought me right back in. It was one of the most emotional communal shows I've ever been to in my life, seeing people from all over the world congregate, having Chris Cornell come out doing Mother Love Bone, Temple of the Dog. That show to this day sits in my top 5 list for sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yield is another great album.
Yeah.
I love Yield.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pearl Jam Live, 35 years of legendary music and revolutionary shows. Out now. Find it wherever books are sold. Look for it at your nearest independent bookstore. You can find your nearest independent bookstore at BOOKEDONROCK.com. And Selena, where can people find you online?
I'm everywhere. I'm on Facebook and X and Instagram. My handle is just my name, and I would love to hear from people. I've been running a few contests on my socials as well. So
I saw it. Yeah. Yes. I follow you, I think, on Instagram and maybe X too. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. All right. Selena Fragassi, thank you again for coming on, and I look forward to having you back on again in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it. It's in the books.